For decades, the official histories of World War II have been printed, sealed, and sanctified, the final record of humanity's darkest years. Yet beneath the museums and archives lies another version of events, one pieced together from shredded memos, missing manifests, and voices that never made it to trial. These are not the stories of generals or parades, but of vanished convoys, encrypted radio ghosts, and black files buried beneath Cold War dust. Each fragment speaks of an operation erased from history, the kind that leaves no survivors, only silence, and the faint rustle of paper stamped "Classified Do Not Release." Chapter 1: The Vanished Convoy of Operation Eclipse. In the dying weeks of April 1945, when the Reich's once iron grip had dissolved into chaos, Allied intelligence began intercepting fragmented transmissions from a pocket of German resistance hidden within the Harz Mountains. The region was a maze of tunnels, mines, and fortified ridges, the final refuge for scattered SS units and Nazi scientific personnel attempting to flee westward before Soviet forces reached Berlin. Amid the collapse, British Field Security Section 5 authorized a covert strike under the codename Operation Eclipse. Officially, it was a search and secure mission aimed at preventing high-ranking Nazi officers from establishing a last stand in the Bavarian Alps. But documents, unearthed decades later, reveal Eclipse had another purpose entirely: to intercept a train convoy carrying both gold reserves and intelligence assets too valuable to fall into Soviet hands. The mission dossier, compiled at Shaif headquarters in Versailles and marked most secret, listed 41 operatives drawn from the 30th Assault Unit, a British-led special team under Naval Intelligence Command. These men were trained in demolition, linguistics, and enemy document recovery. Their orders, dated 24 April 1945, instructed them to advance north from Kassel under radio silence and seize a transport identified as Cargo R-17. That cargo was reported to be traveling by rail from Magdeburg to an undisclosed Alpine depot, guarded by remnants of the SS Forschungskommando. Intelligence suggested it carried not only plundered bullion, but also personnel connected to the Reich's most classified weapons programs. By the time the Eclipse detachment crossed into the Harz foothills, communications with their forward scout teams had already begun to fragment. Weather records show heavy mist and electrical storms in the region on 27 April, conditions that would have made radio transmission nearly impossible. Locals later recalled hearing low-flying aircraft that night, aircraft with no Allied insignia. When a US armored unit reached the area 3 days later, the Eclipse column had vanished entirely. The only sign of their presence was a single burned scout car discovered near the town of Blankenburg, its occupants unidentifiable for years. British command maintained that the team had been lost in hostile crossfire or possibly captured by Soviet advance units. Yet no trace of Soviet reports ever mentioned such an engagement. What did surface decades later were scattered fragments from Bletchley Park's decrypted Enigma logs. Among the recovered traffic was a message dated 29 April 1945, sent from an SS logistics officer in Goslar. Cargo R-17 transferred under Allied escort. Further orders classified. Convoy diverted south. Historians would later argue that this line confirmed direct Allied contact with the transport, a meeting that officially never occurred. In 1952, during reconstruction efforts in Lower Saxony, workers unearthed fragments of military crates bearing both German and British stenciling. The recovered debris included melted bars consistent with gold alloy, along with paperwork referencing something called Project Einheitsdämmerung. Project Unity Twilight. None of the British authorities at the time could identify the term, though later research connected it to early post-war scientific transfers under Operation Paperclip. Still, the names listed in the surviving manifests did not appear in any declassified US or British rosters. Among them was Dr. H. Voss, a physicist previously associated with the Luftwaffe's remote propulsion tests. Voss officially died in a Soviet detention camp in 1947, but fingerprint records from a 1951 US Air Force medical file show a match under a different alias. By the time these inconsistencies reached parliamentary scrutiny in the early 1960s, the Eclipse file had already been reclassified and sealed under NATO authority. Researchers who requested access to the material were informed that the records had been transferred for preservation to a joint security archive in Brussels. However, internal British correspondences uncovered in 1998 indicate that many Eclipse documents were destroyed in a routine culling of obsolete intelligence files in 1959, a decision ordered personally by the then Director of Naval Intelligence. The attached memo, preserved only as a microfilm copy, carried a final handwritten note: cargo secured, personnel expendable. Retired servicemen interviewed in the 1970s recalled whispers of an unmarked train intercepted somewhere near the Harz Passes, a train never logged in Allied movement reports. One driver claimed to have ferried sealed metal containers, guarded by men in mismatched uniforms speaking both English and German, toward a makeshift airstrip west of Hanover. Flight manifests from that airfield were mysteriously incomplete for the last week of April 1945. It was as if several aircraft had departed but never arrived at any recorded destination. There were further anomalies. An RAF meteorological unit stationed at Chell reported unusual radiation readings along their route 2 days after the disappearance. Their logbook noted residual thermal contamination, but the notation was crossed out in red pencil. In the same area, villagers reported livestock deaths and scorched soil patterns resembling small-scale detonations. These details were buried in local police archives until a German researcher uncovered them during a post-reunification audit. Over the years, fragments of Eclipse have resurfaced through secondary files, often mislabeled or partially censored. One fragment, titled After Action Debrief Subject E9, refers to a survivor, a British sergeant found wandering near Göttingen in May 1945, suffering from exposure and total memory loss. His interrogation transcript is incomplete, but one sentence remains legible. The train wasn't German anymore. Medical notes confirm that he later died in a sanatorium outside Cambridge in 1949. His personal effects included a compass bearing the insignia of the Royal Navy Intelligence Division and a scrap of cloth embroidered with the Reichsadler, the Nazi eagle, stitched upside down. To this day, Operation Eclipse remains officially unsolved. Declassified NATO summaries admit the probable loss of a special operations team during enemy pursuit, yet none mention Cargo R-17 or Project Unity Twilight. The gold supposedly recovered from Germany in 1945 falls short of pre-war banking inventories by nearly 140 metric tons, an unexplained discrepancy that researchers have attempted to link to the vanished convoy. But the more significant mystery may lie in what else that transport carried: the scientific documents, the personnel, and perhaps technology that would later shape early Cold War research programs on both sides of the Iron Curtain. In 2011, an independent German filmmaker obtained access to recently digitized British archives and discovered a series of photographs mislabeled under the tag ECL Harz. The images showed armed soldiers standing beside a derailed train, its carriages half buried in mud. One frame captured a black uniformed figure beside a British officer, their faces obscured. The photograph bore the date 28 April 1945. Within weeks of its discovery, the file was withdrawn from the digital catalogue without explanation. The silence surrounding Operation Eclipse has grown heavier with each decade. Family members of those listed on the mission's roster have petitioned for recognition, but without official acknowledgement, their names remain absent from Commonwealth war memorials. The Harz region itself has been reshaped by forestry and tourism, erasing the scars of war. Yet beneath its soil, there may still lie the remains of a train that was never meant to be found, and the truth of a mission that ended before the world ever knew it began. Chapter 2: Ghost Signals of the Baltic Sea. The first reports arrived in December 1949, transmitted through NATO's early warning network in Norway. A series of intermittent radio bursts were detected over the Baltic coast, coded pulses lasting less than a second, repeating at irregular intervals. At first, analysts assumed they were Soviet naval transmissions or random atmospheric interference. But when the same pattern was recorded simultaneously in Scotland, Denmark and Kiel, the coincidence could no longer be dismissed. The signals, faint and distorted, appeared to originate from the Gulf of Bothnia, near the coordinates of a long-destroyed Kriegsmarine relay station that had been bombed to rubble 4 years earlier. The anomaly was quietly labelled Incident BL-014. It was to remain one of NATO's most closely guarded post-war mysteries. Intelligence officers began piecing together the fragments. Spectral analysis conducted at the Royal Signals Research Establishment suggested the transmission format was an obsolete German naval cipher, specifically a modified M4 Enigma sequence. No modern Soviet equipment used it, The pulse repetition rates corresponded eerily to the message intervals of U-boat Wolfpack command networks from 1944. Yet, according to Kriegsmarine archives, the relay station responsible, codenamed Seescheibe, had been obliterated by Allied bombers in February 1945. British aerial reconnaissance photos taken days after the strike showed nothing but scorched ground and collapsed concrete. There should have been no surviving transmitters, no operational generators, and certainly no one left to operate them. By the spring of 1950, monitoring posts in Helsinki, Oslo, and Riga began detecting faint echoes of the same pattern, bouncing across ionospheric layers. Analysts dubbed them ghost signals. Curiously, the transmissions often began exactly at 0013 hours UTC, regardless of local time. Each sequence lasted precisely 7 minutes, then went silent. The signal strength fluctuated, but seemed to track the presence of NATO reconnaissance flights in the area. Some believed the source was moving beneath the sea, possibly transmitted from a submerged platform. The idea of an active U-boat operating undetected in the early Cold War was dismissed as implausible. Yet, an internal CIA memorandum dated 10 August 1950 refers explicitly to continuing maritime emissions from presumed Axis infrastructure, persistence unexplainable. That same summer, Swedish fishermen in the Bothnian Bay reported hearing rhythmic humming sounds beneath the water, described as metallic knocking, consistent with sonar pings. Several trawlers complained of interference on their radio bands and compass malfunctions. When the Swedish Navy dispatched the minesweeper HMS R12 to investigate, sonar operators detected a large metallic object resting on the seabed, approximately 40 nautical miles off Umeå. The contact was logged at 73 meters depth. Divers sent down to inspect the site reported the remains of a steel structure resembling a collapsed radar mast. Strangely, the debris carried intact German naval insignia. The Balkenkreuz, still visible beneath layers of rust, alongside newer welding seams inconsistent with 1940s manufacturing. The divers' names were never publicly released. According to a classified Swedish defense report from 1972, declassified only briefly before being sealed again, one of those divers, Lieutenant Carl Bergström, resurfaced in a state of acute disorientation. He claimed that within the structure they found not a wreck, but a sealed hatchway emanating low electrical activity, as if a generator was still running below. Bergström described entering a narrow compartment lined with bakelite control panels, vacuum tubes, and one intact transmitter emitting a faint hum. When they attempted to photograph it, their equipment failed. Hours later, Bergström and his team were recalled to the surface under orders from an unidentified NATO liaison officer who arrived by helicopter. 2 weeks later, Bergström was found dead in his Stockholm apartment. The coroner ruled it suicide, but his widow maintained that his hands were chemically burned, consistent with exposure to high-voltage discharge. In 1953, NATO's Signals Division initiated Project Phantom Net, a covert investigation into the Baltic transmissions. The operation involved joint British, West German, and American cryptographers working out of a converted naval facility near Lübeck. Their objective: to decode the repeating bursts and determine whether they posed a security threat. Using captured Enigma components, analysts managed to partially translate the sequences. The decrypted fragments contained sets of numbers, geographic coordinates, and repeated phrases: Einheit bleibt, Position sichern, kein Rückzug. One particular line, transmitted multiple times across a 3-month span, read simply: Zentrale aktiv, warten auf Befehl, central active awaiting orders. The phrasing implied automation or continued protocol execution long after human operators were gone. Internal memoranda suggest the analysts proposed several explanations. 1. That a buried automated transmission system had survived the war, programmed to reactivate periodically through residual power sources. 2. That a post-war entity, possibly Soviet or Western intelligence, was reusing the old frequencies as a decoy to mask classified communications. A third, and least comfortable theory, suggested deliberate reactivation by remnants of the wartime German network that had escaped accountability. The phrase "stay behind system" appears repeatedly in those discussions, hinting at the early shadow structures that would later inspire the Gladio network across Europe. As Cold War tensions escalated, Phantom Net's files were moved under US control. In 1961, the NSA conducted a high-altitude listening sweep using a modified RB-47 aircraft. The data confirmed that the ghost signals were emanating from multiple points along the seafloor, not a single source. Some signals were even triangulated to land-based coordinates in former East Prussia, now Kaliningrad Oblast, a restricted Soviet military zone. The discovery posed an uncomfortable question. Were the Soviets reusing old Nazi infrastructure for clandestine operations? Or were both superpowers unknowingly monitoring the same unsolved phenomenon? Officially, Project Phantom Net was terminated in 1964 after the last recorded transmission on April 22nd of that year. Unofficially, a handful of naval officers continued to monitor the Baltic frequencies well into the 1970s. One such officer, Commander Peter Hall of the Royal Navy, later described intercepting a final burst of coded noise in 1971, identical to the original 1949 pattern. His private notes, archived by his family after his death, include a hand-drawn map marking a single coordinate, 60°, 19°, an unremarkable patch of sea between Åland and the Swedish coast. Next to it, Hall had written two words, "Still transmitting." In 1972, Swedish divers once again returned to the coordinates to verify Hall's data. This time, the operation was conducted under the guise of geological surveying. The team recorded sonar returns consistent with a cylindrical object, roughly 15 meters in diameter, half buried in sediment. They also documented weak electromagnetic emissions matching those logged 2 decades earlier. Before further dives could be made, the Swedish government abruptly ordered the project halted, citing territorial sensitivities. The recovered sonar tapes vanished within days. Years later, an unmarked reel of magnetic audio surfaced in a private collection in Malmö, believed to be a copy of those transmissions. When played, it produced rhythmic bursts of static and a faint human voice repeating the word bereit, ready. To this day, the so-called ghost signals of the Baltic Sea remain unexplained. The declassified NATO summary, released in 1998, refers to them only as historical interference phenomena without operational threat. Yet the metadata of that same file reveals a later revision in 1986, inserted under US authority, including the words, "Further monitoring suspended. Source untraceable." Researchers who examined the data noted one chilling detail. The signal pattern continued to match naval encryption algorithms that had long since become obsolete. Whatever sent them was still speaking in the language of a war that ended decades earlier. Those who have studied the phenomenon agree on only one thing. Somewhere beneath the grey waters of the Baltic, a relic of the Third Reich continues to operate, blind, mechanical, and faithful to orders that no one remembers giving. Chapter 3. The Siberian Files, Operation Silver Ash. In the winter of 1946, amid the frozen corridors of occupied Germany, a quiet exchange took place under the auspices of the US Army Counterintelligence Corps. It was not part of Operation Paperclip, at least, not officially. The mission carried its own designation, Operation Silver Ash. Its objective was to extract a small group of German scientific personnel held in Soviet captivity and deliver them to an undisclosed American installation in Alaska. The men were not rocketeers or chemists. They were meteorologists, though the files list their expertise under a more cryptic term, atmospheric manipulation. What precisely that meant remained classified for half a century. The story begins in the ruins of Jena, Germany, once home to the Reich's Aeronautical Research Institute. Soviet troops had overrun the facility in late April 1945, seizing laboratories tied to weather and jet propulsion experiments. Among the prisoners was Dr. Heinrich Voss, a Luftwaffe physicist who had worked on upper atmosphere ionization. His team had been developing devices that could create artificial high-pressure fronts for long-range reconnaissance operations, or, as one decrypted SS memorandum later described, controlled disruption of meteorological stability. When the Soviets transferred Voss and 9 others to a labor institute in Novosibirsk, US intelligence took notice. By 1946, American analysts suspected the Soviet Union was using captured German science to experiment with weather as a potential strategic weapon. Silver Ash was conceived within the Office of Policy Coordination, an early forerunner of the CIA. The directive, signed 14 November 1946, authorized the unofficial acquisition of enemy scientists from foreign custody through negotiated transfer. In reality, it was a sanctioned abduction, Operation personnel included former OSS officers and 2 pilots from the 509th Composite Group, the same unit that had flown over Hiroshima. Their cover story involved repatriation of displaced persons. In December 1946, they crossed into Siberia disguised as Red Cross relief agents. Within weeks, 10 men, all German nationals, disappeared from a Soviet research compound outside Krasnoyarsk. The Kremlin accused the West of espionage. Washington denied involvement. The missing scientists reappeared 6 months later at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Their arrival was documented in an internal Air Force report dated 3rd of June, 1947. Each scientist received a false identity and an employment contract under the Weather Modification Division of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, the program's official name, Project Cirrus. Publicly, Cirrus was presented as a harmless attempt to study cloud seeding and atmospheric control. But declassified fragments of correspondence between Fort Wainwright and Wright Field reveal a different purpose, testing controlled meteorological events for strategic impact evaluation. The Germans were ordered to design field generators capable of producing ionized plumes in the stratosphere, mimicking natural storm systems. The equipment used massive cathode arrays powered by surplus radar amplifiers. Test logs refer to localized energy saturation of tropospheric fields. By late 1948, something had changed in the Alaskan records. Meteorological stations reported erratic electrical storms over the Beaufort Sea, unnatural in pattern and intensity. One entry, dated 19th of October 1948, notes cyclonic formation coincident with Test Phase 3, resulting in communication blackouts across northern Canada. 2 months later, on 6 December, a Soviet convoy was caught in a catastrophic storm in the Kara Sea, losing 4 ships and hundreds of men. The event was officially recorded as an Arctic weather anomaly. However, internal CIA memos dated January 1949 linked the timing of the storm to silver ash testing operations. One line reads starkly, "Correlation unacceptable. Suspend further experiments until political cover assured." The Soviets, furious and suspicious, issued diplomatic protests accusing the United States of tampering with natural forces. Western media dismissed it as Cold War propaganda, but within the Pentagon, concerns were mounting. The Silver Ash team continued experiments under tighter secrecy. By 1950, they had relocated to a remote site north of Fairbanks, known locally as Station Echo. Satellite imagery would later identify the remnants of large parabolic antennas buried under permafrost. Witnesses described auroral disturbances visible from as far south as Anchorage. Civilian pilots reported luminous spirals in the night sky, phenomena later echoed in Project HARP studies decades afterward. The Germans' behavior had grown increasingly erratic. A debriefing report from 1951 records Dr. Voss claiming that the atmosphere itself had become self-reactive, that their instruments were receiving backscatter frequencies not of natural origin. He wrote, "The sky returns our signal altered. It answers." A year later, his team was placed under military guard. One of the scientists, Dr. Klaus Engelhardt, was found dead in his quarters, apparently from electrical shock. His notebook contained a single unfinished line in German, "Die Wolken hören uns," the clouds hear us. By 1953, Silver Ash had ceased public funding. Yet according to budgetary footnotes, its resources were quietly absorbed into another program, Project Argus, ostensibly studying nuclear effects on the upper atmosphere. In reality, it continued the same research under military control. Internal communications from the Atomic Energy Commission to the Air Force mention previous field data from Silver Ash proving electrometeorological viability. The surviving German staff were reclassified as foreign technical consultants and placed in isolation. They no longer corresponded with their families. Their names vanished from all US immigration records after 1954. The only first-hand testimony of their fate comes from a US meteorological officer, Captain Raymond Steele, who in 1972 gave an interview to a congressional subcommittee investigating covert research. Steele described visiting the Fairbanks site in early 1950. They had these massive coils, each the height of a man, all linked with copper bus lines and vacuum tubes. It looked like a storm trapped in a cage. The Germans said it could talk to the sky, that was their phrase. When they switched it on, you could feel the air shake like thunder with no sound. Then they shut it down, and no one spoke for hours. Steele's statement was later redacted from the public transcript. In 1974, a heavily redacted CIA memo referencing Operation Silver Ash was released under the Freedom of Information Act. The final paragraph contains one chilling phrase: uncontrolled meteorological resonance. Terminate all subjects. No further details were disclosed. Within weeks, a classified cable ordered the dismantling of remaining Silver Ash hardware. Satellite imagery taken years later showed the site completely erased, the tundra leveled and fenced off. Environmental surveys conducted in the 1980s reported anomalous magnetic readings and elevated ozone levels directly above the area where Station Echo once stood. In 1991, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russian intelligence archives revealed their own dossier on Silver Ash. The file, labeled Alpha Pepple, Alpha Ash, included intercepted communications between American outposts in Alaska and unknown transmitters operating from the Arctic Ocean. One transcript records a repeated phrase in distorted English: awaiting correction, awaiting correction. The signal's origin was never confirmed. The Russian report concluded with a line written in Cyrillic hand: "The weather remembers." To this day, neither the US nor Russia officially acknowledges the existence of Operation Silver Ash. The name surfaces only in fragments of Cold War correspondence and in the whispered recollections of technicians who worked on early atmospheric tests. Some claim the project was an early attempt at ionospheric research. Others believe it crossed into territory that no science should have touched: the deliberate manipulation of the Earth's natural systems. Whether the men of Silver Ash died, vanished, or were simply erased from history, one thing remains certain: the storm they created did not end in 1949. It continues to circle, unseen, above the high Arctic skies. Chapter 4: The Shadows Beneath Peenemünde. In the summer of 1987, East German construction workers clearing debris near the ruins of the Peenemünde Army Research Center stumbled upon what appeared to be an access hatch buried beneath a meter of sand and brick. The site had been bombed into ruin in 1943 and later sealed off by Soviet forces. But satellite imagery commissioned by the GDR's Ministry for State Security revealed subtle depressions inconsistent with natural terrain. When the workers opened the hatch, a gust of air escaped that smelled of oil and decay. The passage led downward into darkness. Within hours, the Stasi had cordoned off the area and classified the find as militarish relevant. What they discovered inside would never appear in any museum display. Peenemünde had been the birthplace of the V-2 rocket, the so-called Wunderwaffe that terrorized London in 1944. But the tunnel complex uncovered beneath it had no mention in the Reich's blueprints. The chamber walls were smooth, reinforced with precast concrete, not the rough stone typical of wartime bunkers. Inside lay rusted crates marked with the emblem of the Ahnenerbe, the SS's pseudo-scientific research branch. Their contents were chillingly diverse: medical instruments, glass vacuum tubes, fragments of aircraft control systems, and, most disturbingly, human skeletal remains wired with metal braces. Faded labels bore phrases like Subject 14B and Morgenrot Versuchsreihe. Morgenrot, morning red. The word appeared dozens of times throughout the recovered documents. The Stasi's internal report, preserved under file code X34687, noted that the instruments found were experimental biological interfaces, components for linking human nervous tissue to mechanical control systems. Among the papers was a single reel of 35mm film, its leader labeled Project Morgenrot, Versuch 9. The footage, according to a later summary written by a Soviet liaison scientist, showed a series of test chambers where prisoners were restrained in metal frames connected to primitive gyroscopic rigs. The subjects' eyes were covered with opaque goggles. Their heads and limbs were fitted with electrodes. At the sound of a tone, the rigs began to rotate violently, measuring reaction times and neural feedback. Some subjects convulsed, others remained motionless. The film ended abruptly after a blinding flash. The Soviet advisors who reviewed the material confiscated all artifacts within 24 hours. They declared the site off-limits, posting armed guards. Yet several Stasi engineers who had entered the tunnels before the closure described a secondary corridor leading deeper underground. Its entrance was welded shut with fresh metal, bearing the stamp NATO property, do not disturb. This raised immediate suspicion. How could a NATO-marked section exist inside Soviet-occupied territory? The GDR officials filed a complaint, but the Soviet military command instructed them to cease excavation in the interest of fraternal security, cooperation. The matter was never reopened. The first Western mention of the Peenemünde tunnels came years later, after German reunification. In 1994, a West German journalist named Dieter Althaus obtained declassified fragments from the Stasi archive. One document, a translation of a 1944 SS correspondence, referenced Humanen Steuerorgan, human control units, being prepared for flight experiments. The text mentioned an order from Heinrich Himmler authorizing integration of neurological specimens into gyroscopic systems for enhanced guidance stability. It implied that the SS had attempted to replace unreliable electronic components with biological feedback loops derived from living subjects. Modern historians dismissed it as Nazi pseudoscience, but the mechanical fragments recovered at the site told a different story. By the early 2000s, aerospace engineers re-examined the surviving equipment stored in Berlin's Bundesarchiv. They identified components that matched early inertial navigation systems decades ahead of their time. Some gyroscopes used organic gels instead of standard lubricants, and traces of collagen were found in the materials. When forensic analysts tested these residues, they confirmed them as biological in origin. The idea that human tissue could have been used in weapon guidance technology seemed unthinkable. Yet the evidence was there, preserved in rust and dust beneath the Baltic winds. One particularly disturbing file, Morgenroth Bericht 5, describes a test conducted on 8th of February, 1945. It details the use of volunteers from Ravensbrück subjected to rotational endurance within sealed capsules at acceleration levels exceeding 10 Gs. The stated objective: measure neuroelectrical coherence during stress for potential control. Transmission. The report concludes with the phrase subject disassociated negative. Survival. The test supervisor's name is redacted, but the signature begins with Dr. H. Some historians believe this to be Dr. Hans Kammler, the SS general who oversaw secret weapons development and vanished without trace in May 1945. His involvement in Morgenroth has never been proven, yet his disappearance coincides precisely with the project's last recorded date. According to scattered US Army intelligence documents, the Allies discovered partial references to Project Morgenroth among captured SS archives in 1946. However, when British scientists attempted to locate the described facilities, they found nothing. The island of Usedom had been stripped clean by the Soviets, who shipped machinery and personnel eastward. A US memo from 1951 refers cryptically to Peenemünde residuals under Soviet evaluation, biological component uncertain. That uncertainty persisted for decades. What happened to the film reel after its seizure remains unclear. Some sources claim it was transferred to the KGB's 4th Directorate in Moscow and later copied for NATO intelligence after the Cold War thaw. In 1998, a NATO security contractor reported viewing an unlabeled reel depicting extreme centrifuge, experiments with biological subjects, stored at a Brussels archive under a temporary accession code beginning with ECL 45, eerily similar to the Eclipse files from the Harz incident. The description matches the lost Morgenroth footage almost exactly. Within weeks of that report, the reel was reclassified and moved to an undisclosed location. When questioned, NATO officials denied its existence. Local accounts around Peenemünde add another layer to the mystery. Residents who lived near the restricted zone during the 1950s spoke of hearing mechanical vibrations at night, long after the war had ended. Some claimed the ground trembled, as if machinery were running underground. Others recalled lights beneath the shoreline, visible through cracks in the sand during low tide. When East German authorities attempted to install power lines in the area in 1961, workers reported electromagnetic interference and sudden equipment failures. They were told to abandon the site immediately. By 2010, a small team of German researchers from the Technical University of Berlin petitioned for access to the original excavation logs. Their findings remain unpublished, but one team member, interviewed anonymously, revealed that radiation readings near the supposed Morgenroth chamber were consistent with residual isotopes from medical experimentation. She claimed that one sealed section of the tunnel complex, accessible only through collapsed ventilation shafts, still contained machinery humming faintly despite having no visible power source. It was like the walls were alive, she said. Shortly afterward, the university suspended further investigation, citing safety hazards. Peenemünde today is a museum, a site of reconciliation and history. Visitors see restored V-2 rockets and displays about Germany's technological ambitions. Yet none of the official tours mention the lower tunnels, nor do the maps acknowledge the sealed entrances along the forest perimeter. Locals say that on quiet nights, the wind blowing through the old ventilation shafts carries a low, rhythmic sound, like the distant rotation of a machine that never stopped turning. Whatever Project Morgenrot truly was, an experiment in human endurance, an early attempt at neuromechanical control, or something far darker, its traces continue to haunt the soil of Euston. The documents that survive speak of science stripped of humanity, of progress pursued beyond moral comprehension. And if the sealed tunnels beneath Peenemünde still contain the remnants of that work, then somewhere in the darkness below, the shadows of the past may still be moving. Chapter 5. The Disappearing Men of Camp Griffin. In the autumn of 1951, deep in the wooded hills of Alsace near the French-German border, a small Allied intelligence outpost known as Camp Griffin ceased all communication. The facility, officially listed as a joint debriefing center, was in reality a covert detention site run under the aegis of the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee. Its mission was simple: interrogate and relocate former Axis operatives deemed too valuable or too dangerous to stand trial. Griffin's personnel were handpicked from British MI6, American CIC, and remnants of the French WWII Bureau. 42 men and women worked there. On the morning of October 19th, every one of them disappeared. Camp Griffin had been constructed from the ruins of a Luftwaffe radio post outside the village of Bitche, converted in 1946 into an interrogation and translation facility. Its existence was never public. A dirt road wound up through the forest to a double-fence compound equipped with a single guard tower, a generator house, and an underground communications room. The camp's files, later declassified in fragments, reveal that its primary occupants were not soldiers, but technical subjects, transferred from hidden Vatican safehouses and American-run relocation routes, known collectively as the Rat Line. Among those detained were former SS officers, intelligence analysts from the Abwehr, and one man described cryptically as a researcher from the Ahnenerbe division. The objective, as written in a 1950 memorandum, was long-term assessment and containment pending neutralization. The first sign of trouble came at 05:30 on the morning of October 19th. The nearby French gendarmerie station in Sarreguemines reported a sudden burst of shortwave transmission emanating from Griffin's assigned frequency, a continuous Morse sequence repeating the same pattern. Tida. Translated, it read, "Come, come." The signal lasted for 7 minutes, then ended abruptly. When a supply convoy arrived later that day, they found the gates open, the lights still burning, and meals half-eaten in the mess hall. There were no signs of struggle, no gunfire, and no human remains. Radios were still powered, typewriters mid-sentence, and coffee cups half full. It was as though the camp's inhabitants had simply walked away in unison. The initial investigation was led by Colonel Robert H. Fenwick of the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps. His 42-page field report, stamped Secret UK Eyes Only, offers a clinical recounting of the discovery. All facilities intact. No forced entry. Absence of personnel total. One vehicle missing, Willie's Jeep, license G4927. Tracks end 300 meters south of perimeter, terminating abruptly as if lifted. Fenwick's team also recovered a series of tape reels from the camp's radio room. The recordings contained several intercepted transmissions dating back 3 days before the disappearance. The voices were German, clipped and faint, using wartime codenames from defunct Abwehr networks. One phrase recurred repeatedly: "The Black Book is open. Section 12 is active." When French authorities requested access to the tapes, they were told the material had been transferred to London for analysis. No further mention of them appears in any British archive. A second team, dispatched under Operation Valence, combed the nearby woods for evidence. Dogs refused to enter the perimeter. Those that did grew disoriented and howled incessantly. One soldier recorded in his diary that the ground vibrated faintly, as if machinery were operating below. Excavation revealed a concrete sublevel beneath the communications hut that did not appear on blueprints. Inside were steel doors stamped C12. They were welded shut from the Outside, survivors from nearby villages later described seeing unmarked aircraft circling the valley the night before the disappearance. Some claimed the planes bore no national insignia. Others swore they saw a bright, silent flash above the tree line, followed by a low-frequency hum that rattled windows. The accounts were dismissed as hysteria, yet radar logs from a NATO air defense station in Metz recorded unidentified low-altitude contacts at 22:41 hours, hovering, not moving, over the Griffin coordinates. The entry was quietly erased in later revisions of the record. In 1953, 2 years after the incident, a former OSS translator named Marguerite Blanc came forward with information that connected Griffin to an earlier program known as Operation Vestige. Her testimony, sealed until 1999, described the camp as a clearinghouse for the disappeared, a staging point for former Axis scientists being funneled into Western defense contracts. She claimed that a shipment of sealed crates had arrived at Griffin 1 week before the vanishing, marked Return to Sender, ECL. The label is believed to reference the same operational codename associated with the vanished convoy from Operation Eclipse. The crates, she said, emitted a low buzzing sound, like a live wire in a coffin. Her statement was dismissed as unreliable, yet her employment records at the CIC confirm she had direct access to Griffin's personnel logs until mid-October 1951. That same year, NATO command initiated clean field procedures, effectively erasing Griffin from military maps. The site was declared contaminated with unexploded ordnance and sealed indefinitely. Locals were warned to stay clear due to radio hazards. Decades later, when construction crews began clearing nearby forest in the 1980s, they uncovered fragments of Allied ration tins and a scorched metal plate bearing the letters CG. French military police confiscated the items within hours. Nothing further was found. In 1995, a British journalist investigating declassified Cold War programs uncovered a memo from the Defense Intelligence Staff dated 12th March 1952. It referenced containment failure at Installation Griffin, all assets presumed compromised. No retrieval authorized. A marginal note beside it, handwritten and faint, read, "They opened the file. It opened back." Whether metaphor or confession, no one could say. Modern researchers studying the Griffin case often point to the eerie similarities between the camp's layout and that of known post-war black sites used for covert interrogation. The existence of the sealed sublevel C-12 has fueled speculation that the facility housed more than personnel, possibly experimental archives or captured devices. In a 2007 interview, retired CIA operative George M. Alcott admitted that Camp Griffin was one of ours, but not entirely. When pressed for clarification, he added, "It started as a prison. It ended as a laboratory. After that, it wasn't ours anymore." In 2014, French archaeologists attempting a geophysical survey near the former Griffin perimeter detected dense metallic anomalies below the surface, consistent with a large buried structure. Before excavation could begin, the Ministry of Defense intervened and revoked access, citing heritage preservation under Security Clause 114B. Residents of Bitcher claim that the military still patrols the forest at night, though the installation officially ceased to exist 70 years ago. The fate of the 42 men and women who vanished remains unknown. No graves, no flight records, no transfers. Their names are absent from all Allied payrolls after October 1951. Family inquiries met with silence or denial. The last photograph ever taken at Camp Griffin shows a group of intelligence officers standing before the compound gate, smiling, unaware that within days they would all be gone. The image's reverse bears a handwritten note, possibly by the photographer himself. "We are safe here. No one will ever find us." When the fog rolls through the forests of Alsace, old villagers still claim to hear faint radio static on their shortwave sets, bursts of coded clicks that repeat in patterns too deliberate to be random. Some have traced the signals to 47.9 MHz, the same frequency assigned to Griffin's communications band in 1951. The transmissions begin at 13 hours. They last exactly 7 minutes, then the forest falls silent again, as if the voices of the missing are still transmitting from somewhere deep below, waiting for orders that will never come. For every sealed file and erased coordinate, there remains the whisper of something unfinished. Operation Eclipse, the Baltic ghost signals, the lost Siberian scientists, the buried tunnels of Peenemünde, and the vanishing at Camp Griffin, fragments of a history rewritten by those who inherited its secrets. The Cold War may have frozen the world above ground, but beneath it, the machinery of the old conflict never stopped turning. Somewhere in forgotten vaults and unmarked graves, the truth endures, humming faintly through static and silence, waiting for the day when the last lock gives way and the buried war finally resurfaces.